just to let you know what we're going to be covering today, so we're going to be looking at sort of three key areas. We're going to be looking at placing the platform in context, so looking at how the Sitecore platform, what it can do, where some of the functionality will fit into some of the strategies that we think you should be applying. It will make sense as we go further along the presentation. Knowing who is on your website and what they are doing is something we get asked all the time. And before moving on to driving positive actions, knowing who people are, knowing what you can do with the platform is all great, but at the same time, it's actually worthless unless you're able to leverage that to drive positive actions. So a few ground rules. Today's session is being recorded, so we will share a copy of the recording within the next 48 hours. And if you would like to ask a question at the end of today's presentation, feel free to input your question on the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. So just to introduce myself, my name is Mario Kiriakou. I am one of the founders and managing partner at a digital agency called Ratio. We're a Sitecore partner. Just to give you a quick background, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm keen to get into the topic, and we've got quite a lot to cover today, but we as an agency normally focus exclusively on trying to understand what customers are trying to achieve in terms of who their audience is, who they're trying to target, and mapping those strategies against the functionality within technology. We work quite heavily with Sitecore, but there's normally quite a disconnect between identifying how we should be engaging with customers and actually how do we do that. And we try to sort of bridge that disconnect. So heading straight into the presentation. So a little bit of context. We've got quite a few different people on the call today, so I'm sure some of you are more familiar with the Sitecore platform than others. Some of you may be on older versions of the platform and therefore haven't seen some of the latest marketing functionality. But to give you, I suppose, a really high-level overview of how Sitecore fits together. So Sitecore called this the layer model. In a nutshell, starting from the bottom, really, Sitecore has been very successful and very popular because of its ability to integrate with different systems. So beyond just being a standalone CMS. Now, from a higher education perspective, this might be important if you're looking to connect with other aspects such as CRM, if you're looking to connect with your student portals. But Sitecore at its heart is a tool set that allows you to integrate and pass data backwards and forwards between different systems. It's also a data layer. So this is something which is not really talked about that much actually. So when we meet clients, a lot of the conversations start off initially around how do we use Sitecore from, I suppose, a content management point of view, which is fair enough. If that's what it is, that's what it started off originally. But actually from a marketing point of view, the reason why it's quite powerful, especially on Sitecore 8 and some of the iterations beyond that, 8.1, 8.2, it's its ability to collect customer data and store it in a way that marketers can extract insights and then apply positive actions further down the line. So, are you looking to use personalization, marketing automation, and what data insights do we need in order to create the right type of plan so we can engage with customers? And that fits into sort of the processing side, the type of tools that come with the platform. You might be familiar with analytics. The majority of people we work with will look to use GA and Sitecore Analytics in conjunction. Very few customers, none probably, would use Sitecore Analytics standalone. You'd always look to try and augment. If you're using GA, how do you augment Sitecore's analytics? It's normally about getting a bit more detailed information around how your campaigns are processing. Sort of, if you're using things like engagement goals, you can drill down quite deeply into Sitecore Analytics. And then some of the other functionality around marketing automation, which we're going to talk a little bit about later on, personalization. There's tools such as Federated Experience Manager. So if you have non-Sitecore sites, perhaps you've got pages on WordPress or something like that, you can use a tool like FXM to inject personalized content from the main Sitecore site into those non-Sitecore areas of the site. And from a management point of view, a lot of people on the call today will be quite familiar with this, the ability to manage your day-to-day content editing tasks, manage your digital assets, update and edit content on the fly, something we're probably quite familiar with. And something which we're going to be covering a little bit today, and it can sound a little bit of a meaningless buzzword when we talk about omni-channel or multi-channel, but really from a marketing point of view, I always like to think of it as, what is the positive actions? What are you going to do with the data you acquire or are tracking on how customers interact with you? And that's normally around this omni-channel part of it. So how do we deploy those experiences across different channels? Do we deploy a different experience across mobile as opposed to desktop? At its basic and most simplest. But it all goes down to knowing who your visitors are and how they're interacting with you. It's a question we get asked quite often. Organizations collect and analyze a lot of data, but at the sort of basic detailed level, we don't really know who our visitors are at any given time, and therefore we're not sure how or what type of experience we should be delivering to them at the individual level. It can be quite a daunting challenge to say, how do we optimize our site for individual visitors? And it's not to say that it's an achievable task within day one. Like all things, we say start small, identify segments where you can look to optimize, deliver better experiences, and look to expand and grow. There's no ideal state that you're looking to get towards. It's always a just an iteration, a continual process. So a couple of the challenges. So when we've been speaking to marketers within higher education, a couple of digital challenges always seem to crop up. And of course, I'm sure these are not universal. You'll have your own individual challenges, which are relevant to your specific university. But ones we seem to see come up time and again are around who. So who's on your site, trying to understand who's on your site. So how are we collecting data? What format are we collecting that data? Is it in a format that we can then extract the right insights? What actual data do we want to be collecting? We could talk about data all day long, but ultimately you can collect an awful amount of data. But normally, you as an organization, you'll probably know the 3 or 4 different elements that you want to be capturing, because you can then use that to then deliver more relevant experiences. Trying to understand what is the purpose of people's visits. Now, I mean, it goes, at a basic level, you can say, looking for a course. But obviously, different universities will have different personas and segments, from traditional school leavers through to people looking to get back into education, through to people looking at postgraduate courses, through to parents doing research on students' behalves, so their children's behalves, through to businesses who are looking to partner with education establishments. Trying to understand what is the purpose of their visit, trying to figure out the motivation behind that visit, and applying the context. So how does this visit fit into their previous interactions? Understanding who they are, understanding the purpose of a visit is great, but understanding where that fits into perhaps 3 or 4 visits, into a longer journey. Are they an existing customer, not existing customer, are they an existing student versus a prospective student? What are they, how they interacted with you before? Have they downloaded a prospectus? Have they consumed specific content? Are we able to leverage and track this context of their visit to then deploy a more positive action further down the line, or to optimize that next step? And what are student expectations? Well, I mean, it's a broad area, but from our perspective as an agency, there's a couple of ones which can't come up time and time again. So what are students looking to get from higher education websites? An interactive, engaging experience. Well, it sounds really basic, it sounds really obvious, but actually trying to understand what is an engaging experience, try to define that engaging experience. And I'm not necessarily talking about, it has to be fun, but engaging in the sense of you've understood what I'm trying to find out, you've understood my particular motivational areas, and we're going to be talking about that later on in the presentation, and delivering the right type of content for me, which falls into, what is the experience and how tailored and how relevant is it to the visitor. University websites tend to have hundreds and hundreds of pages. an enormous amount of content. I spent some time this morning doing a few searches on university websites, just looking to use the search functionality for courses, and you could pull back 300-400 results for a page. Now, from a student's perspective, how do we optimize those journeys so they can get to the content, get to the course that is relevant for them quickly? And actually, a bit of a curveball, actually, something around social validation, which came up quite recently when we was talking to a customer of ours, is how do we pull in social validation, social proof, when students are looking to determine type of organizer, universities to join, trying to match them up with their own peers and pull in some of that external social content to validate that this is the type of university that their type of people go to. So from a Sitecore perspective, what is the objective? I'm going to read this out because it's really important for this presentation. Is getting your website ready to track, understand, analyze visitors from unknown to known. When we talk about knowing who your visitors are, there's a tendency to think knowing who your visitors are to your website have to be known. In other words, perhaps they've completed a form to receive a prospective, therefore we know who they are at an individual level. But that's not what I mean from a Sitecore perspective. I mean the transition from unknown to known. The majority of visitors are and will always remain unknown to you as a marketer and as an organization. By that I mean you won't necessarily know who they are, whether their name is Mario Kiriakou and they come from here and this is their telephone number. But that's fine, because every unknown visitor is leaving behind a digital footprint. We're collecting data on how they're interacting with you. But from a Sitecore perspective, it's important to understand what type of data we want to collect and how we're tracking that, and have we set up your Sitecore platform correctly for your website in order to track and collect valuable data around your unknown visitors. And obviously, if we can convert them to known, if they fill in a form, and then we can then stitch up that known data against the unknown data, that's great, because now we've got something valuable which we can then transition to more relevant, personalized on-site experiences. But also, as we talk about later on, if you're looking to use more sophisticated email marketing and segmentation, how do you funnel that data into, say, a marketing automation plan in order to better serve those students? For the student experience journey, we know there's several steps that people take when looking to identify the type of university they want to engage with, from the initial research through to application, through to becoming a student, sort of on-campus experience. Now, on-campus is obviously offline, but there's elements around their, I suppose, their duration of their university life, which can be translated to digital, sort of their hobbies they do, the clubs they're signed up with. How do we pull that data and track it all the way through to graduation, and trying to bring people back for postgraduate courses, getting them involved in their alumni associations, etc. So what are the sort of Sitecore actions if you were to go away today and look at your own university website to get in place a sort of that foundational layer, in order to later on, when you start doing some of the cool stuff, you have all the foundational layers in place so you can reap the benefits further down the line. So, tagging content. You're going to have a lot of content, regardless of whether you'll be creating new content in the future. You will have possibly thousands of images, you'll have videos, you'll have blog posts, you'll have articles from your existing students, you have a lot of content. So can we tag some of that content and identify it to specific customer segments? So if you're looking to target and partner with businesses, is part of your website focused around the needs and interests of businesses as opposed to students or parents or people looking to go into postgraduate courses? Which leads into, which I'm sure you've done lots of sort of segmentation, persona work, trying to identify who your students are, who you're looking to serve as an organization. But we can look to create those personas within Sitecore and tag those to specific content, so we can begin to build profiles of individuals' visits and try and match them to profiles. Looking at your site to see if it's component based. By that I mean when you look at your website, you look into the back end, has the page been structured as individual components? Because if it has, that will allow us, when we're looking at the marketing outcomes, to create and personalized rules which swap out components, swap out messaging and images based on who someone is, and swap it for something that's more relevant. If it's not component based, then it's been quite difficult to sort of deploy that sort of type of personalization. And setting up XDB so you can obviously track all the data and obviously pull that data into Xprofile. We do all this because it's not necessarily quick, and it's not necessarily easy, and it can take time, and it can seem boring and not creating a lot of value, but actually it's enormously important. So later on you can reap the benefits, which are elements such as improved targeting and segmentation, delivering a more relevant experience, collecting the right data and figuring out ways how to use that data to improve the experience. So another foundational area is around creating goals. If we're looking to improve the experience for each segment that engages with your university, your sort of key persona groups, we can look to create something called engagement goals for each area of your site. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, but at sort of very high level, if you're familiar with creating goals within GA, it's not too dissimilar, but it's about trying to identify what you're trying to achieve as an organization, but also trying to map your, I suppose, your business goals against your digital goals. So are you looking to get people to sign up for prospectuses, come along to open days, etc.? Identify all the elements on your website which are creating specific value and progressing people along to the next part of their journey, and creating a points-based system. And it's important because then we can, later on, we can begin to create personalized scenarios and even personalized automation plans based on how people are interacting with you. If they're viewed lots of pages and trigger lots of goals, their value will increase, and we can begin to create specific rules to target them. So we talk about data foundation, and within Sitecore 8 specifically, if you're on older versions of Sitecore, you won't have access to sort of the X profile. So I'm showing on screen the experience profile. When we talk about the foundational layers of getting Sitecore set up so you can reap the benefits later on, it all really dovetails into the experience profile. All the goals we've created, all the content pages we've tagged fit into this, into creating and tracking within this profile card. If you're familiar with CRM contact cards, you'll be quite comfortable with the concept. In effect, it's a website version of a CRM contact card. So in effect, it collects data on type of website visits, the type of campaign someone's interacted with, the channels which have driven them, any outcomes they've completed, what profile they match, goals triggered, on-site actions, etc. You also have the potential with further integration to pull in and collect data from third-party systems. Something we come across quite often is also the B2B and retail sphere, where they're looking to pull in sort of commerce and off-site actions into this central card in order to then deploy more sophisticated personalized scenarios and marketing automation plans based on having a greater understanding of how they're interacting across a business. But that's all great, and that's important to do. But really, as a marketer, the bit that I always enjoy is driving the positive action. This is the next step. It's how do you create an experience? What type of a campaigns are you deploying? How do you use information to do something fun and interesting, but also relevant for your audience? So, a quick question: is your web content designed around your customers' motivations? Now, the reason why I ask this is it's because you will have multiple different customer segments you're looking to target, and each one will have, quite rightly, a plethora of selfish goals that they're interested in meeting. They're not interested necessarily in your education establishment establishment on what you're trying to achieve. They have their own fears, worries, and challenges in their own life. But from a marketing perspective, do we understand what really motivates customers? Because if we do, we can deliver, create the right type of content and optimize the experience around messaging, etc., so it's relevant for them. So to give you an example by what I mean, I'm going to show you one that we created recently. So on screen, it's quite simple. So it's about how do we target a prospective student. So this was based around targeting traditional school leavers leaving sixth form to looking to identify the right university. So this is just one customer segment, but we normally do this in order to try and understand for your specific target group, in this instance traditional school leavers, what are their motivations, which will affect their decision making. So elements such as trying to understand the cost of tuition fees, how they're that repaid over time, what's the social life in different universities, what's the cost of living like, that came up quite recently, pressures from parents, fear of moving out, do you stay at home, do you move out, the type of course requirements, etc. I mean, there's dozens of these, but it's important to understand because these are sort of questions which individuals are looking to find answers for. And if we can understand what's motivated them, we can create the copy, the content, etc., which if we profile them correctly, we could then begin to match up and answer these questions implicitly. But there's also the external factors which sit outside of an individual's motivations, which also affects their decision making. So elements such as, which coming up time and time again, regardless of your industry, things like Brexit, the impact on students coming from EU, changes in government policy, visa regulation changes, even things down to currency fluctuations for people looking to finance the cost of tuition fees if you're coming from abroad. But it's important to understand the areas which are sort of influencing your target groups so we can begin to feed that into your sort of content plans. And in terms of positive actions, there's dozens of tactics you can deploy, but we're going to talk specifically around two. So personalization and marketing automation, because they dovetail quite nicely into how do we better treat unknown visitors and how do we better treat known visitors. I'm going to start off by showing how do we leverage personalization. It's a tactic which is talked about quite often, but really from a high level it's about trying to understand or capture and track the inbound channels, what channels are driving people to your site, how they're interacting across your site. So every unknown visitor, we said this before, leaves behind a digital footprint. So how are people interacting, what channel drove them, what do they do once they're on their site, what pages they consume, what videos do they watch, etc. How do we track that? And are we putting that data correctly into the experience profile? Because now we can begin to create personalized rules. We can look to optimize and personalize at scale across hundreds of pages, etc., to deliver personalized experiences. Another element of personalization which has come up quite recently is social proof. So how do we use user-generated content from social feeds such as Instagram, Twitter, in order to deliver a relevant experience. This isn't an out-of-the-box feature within Sitecore, so it does require some external integration with a third-party system, but to give you an understanding of how you could potentially deploy this tactic to better serve a customer segment, it's how we mapped your site content and structures. We understood what content is there and how does it match to specific customer segments. Are we profiling your visitors? So how are we profiling? I've took this as an example because I look at who was coming to the webinar today. So I've cheekily picked this just to illustrate how it works. So when we're profiling visitors, I mean what content you're consuming, what information are you reading, videos you're viewing. So in this crude example, I'm profiling the visitor as interested in looking at hockey courses. Someone who wants to get involved in student clubs, and in a specific individual is interested in a hockey club, which is great but worthless. The reason why it's valuable, in this instance, we're profiling the visitor, trying to understand what are their interests. Obviously, they would have looked at lots of different bits of information, and we would have collected lots of different data points, but we will take this sort of profile of this visitor and map it against external social channels. So in this instance, we are looking into sort of a Twitter feed where we're looking to pull in sort of content and images which match the profiled pages that this individual is looking at, and then we could then pull that into a personalized experience on the site. So for example, if we know that this person's profiled and looked at this page, when they return to the home page, create a rule to display in a component on the site. Perhaps you have a sort of a social section. You can pull in a component to show how your university hockey club has won a trophy. Very crude example. But if you're looking at providing social proof, it's actually quite a powerful way of putting in third-party content which enables you to scale your sort of marketing. Because if you're looking at personalization, one of the questions we get asked quite often is, how much content do we need to create? The answer is as much or as little as you need. It all depends on sort of the plan and strategy you put in place, but actually pulling in data from your own social feeds is a way of scaling your marketing without having to invest in creating any sort of additional content locally. And another form of personalization, we don't talk about this one that often because it's quite a bespoke business case, but obviously lots of universities, not lots of universities, all universities and higher education establishments look to produce prospectuses. So Sitecore has a feature, a tool. It's not part out of the box. It's a paid tool by Sitecore, but they have a tool called Print Experience Manager, and in I suppose a very simplistic way, it allows you to sort of streamline the production process by creating tailored, personalized prospectuses for individuals. So instead of printing your 300-page prospectus and sending out to everyone who fills in the form, printing out a personalized prospectus, perhaps with only say 20 or 30 pages, based around what this individual is interested in terms of specific courses, which obviously has an impact in relevancy, but from a sort of business perspective can have a great impact in terms of lowering costs. And one of my favorites, marketing automation. It's something which we don't seem to talk about it as much as I would like. I think probably down to the basis that email marketing is not seen as, I suppose, as buzzy or as sexy as personalization. But actually, if you had to ask the majority of organizations to pick a really valuable channel, email marketing always comes up at the top, either number one or number two. It's an awesome channel. But we can look to deploy marketing automation within Sitecore to deliver a better experience. So if you think back to what we said at the beginning of the presentation about putting the sort of data foundational layers in place, to allow us to reap the benefits later on, that falls nicely into marketing automation, because by this point we are collecting data on the type of content people are consuming, type of profiles they match, what segments do they sit in, are they a prospective student versus an existing student, etc. And we can begin to create rich automation plans to better serve those individuals. So if people are filling in forms for prospectuses, do we push them into a specific automation plan to nurture them over time and to provide relevant emails which are focused and tailored to that specific individual? And obviously we can create automation plans to match up and target and serve your different customer segments. One of the questions we get asked quite often is, you know, this is all great, it's a lot of work potentially, but are there any sort of early stage opportunities? What can we just go in right now, you know, ignoring all the sort of, you know, everything I've said today, you know, about getting sort of foundational layer in place? What can we just go ahead and look to optimize? And yes, there are things you can look to do and do straight away. There are elements such as, you know, right from the bottom layer, you know, perhaps you want to do personalization around geo-targeting, perhaps you want to do personalization for mobile versus desktop, so a different experience. For me, some of the obvious ones are, I have asset downloaded, but from your perspective, it could be complete a form. If it's someone completing a form for a prospectus or signing up for an open day, can we create a either an on-site personalized experience or push them into an automation plan that is relevant based on that information we have on them? You don't require that much additional information. You probably have enough now to create a more relevant experience, so that's quite a quick win. One that we always say actually is campaigns triggered. The reason why I put it on the top right, if you're doing a lot of sort of outbound marketing campaigns or inbound marketing campaigns where you're deploying marketing investment, whether on social channels or PPC or whatever, we can look to create and optimize those campaigns. So if you're doing things like simple as, say, PPC campaigns on Google or on the display network, where so give you an example, on Google PPC, every time someone's clicking on one of your ads, we're passing over those specific keywords that trigger that campaign, which campaign group, and we can create personalized rules and scenarios to optimize the subsequent page and perhaps switch out the messaging so it's more relevant for this individual based on the keyword which drove them to your page, and even run A/B tests on the page in order to, I suppose, look to increase your conversion rate. So those are for some of the early stage opportunities. That brings us to the end of today's presentation. Just say thank you very much for staying on the call. I appreciate when people join us for these webinars, for taking the time out of their day. We do have time for some questions. So if you would like to ask a question, you can fill it, put your question into the toolbar on the right-hand side of the screen. So I'll just have a quick look to see what questions we have coming in. Okay, we have a question coming in. We have hundreds of pages and thousands of content items. You talked about it earlier on. Are we still able to personalize? It sounds like a lot of work. Yes and no. Depends how you want to do it. You can look to create personalized rules for all your pages. I probably wouldn't recommend that because it's very time consuming. Depending on how your site is structured, you can look to create so automatic personalized scenarios based on your your page hierarchy, your sort of taxonomy. So if you have specific page groups which are relevant for specific segments, we can look to it's a bit of code, a bit of a script in the background, but it's not particularly onerous amount of work. But you can look to say automate those sort of personalized scenarios across hundreds of pages based on your website's taxonomy. So there's ways around it. I'm not sure that answers it exactly, but happy to take that offline and give you a bit more detail about it. Okay. Another question come in, are there any email automation quick wins? Yes. I suppose it depends on who your most valuable segment is. So if you're, and I suppose depending on your role, or if you're focused on graduates, you would look to create an automation plan about how do we identify what content does a graduate want. If someone's interested in postgraduate courses, obviously there's a monetary conversion if we can get them to sign up for a course or to sign up for a prospectus, etc. So try to identify which are your most valuable segments, and ideally ones which perhaps have a measurable digital goal. So signing up for something that we could then look to benchmark the success of an automation plan against that outcome. Okay, that brings us to the end of today. My goal was to keep this at 30 minutes flat, so I appreciate I've gone over a couple of minutes. So if I haven't been able to answer your question, I will take a look and look to get back to you in the next day with an answer. So this just leaves me to say thank you very much for coming, and I hope you can join us again on our next webinar.